The 2023 Beautiful England calendar features 12 locations across England which we have challenged ourselves to travel to, preferably on our motorbikes, during the month that they feature. Our destination for September is labelled simply as the Dart Estuary, Devon, which meant we had a little bit of investigation work to be getting on with. The Dart Estuary is part of the South Devon area of natural beauty, and according to their website, the estuary is the area from the coast up to just shy of Totnes. With a combination of satellite imagery and some street view investigation, we eventually figured out that it was taken from somewhere just southeast of the Dartmouth Castle, with this spot here looking like the most likely place, but we wouldn't be certain until we got there. We also peeked just a little bit further in the calendar and noticed that October's destination was Flowers Barrow, a coastal viewpoint in Dorset, around a 3-hour drive around the coast to the east. Upon realising that the 30th of September was on a Saturday and the 1st of October was on a Sunday, we decided to tackle both destinations in one weekend and save ourselves a little bit of fuel money. With such a long way to travel and the days getting shorter, we would reluctantly sit on the M5 all the way down to Exeter before following the A38 down to Buckfastleigh and then the A384 into Totnes before taking the smaller and much more winding A roads down to Dartmouth Castle, where there's a motorcycle bay right outside, a very short walk away from our vantage point. After getting our photo, the plan was to catch the ferry to the other side of the river and follow the coast up to Torquay, where we could then follow this route from the infamous Bikers Britain book, but in reverse, taking us back up to Exeter, through Chard and Crewkerne, along the A30 and the A356 into Dorchester, before settling in for the night at Wooders campsite near Bear Regis, the same campsite we had used when we visited Old Harry Rocks back in June. From there, it would only be a 25-minute ride the following morning to our parking spot for Flowers Barrow before heading home, either taking the same route up the A350 and the Cotswolds as we used in June, or taking the A31 out to the M3 and the A34 around Oxford, which is a similar route we took when coming back from Brighton in May, but also meant we get to see a little bit more of the New Forest area of natural beauty. Unfortunately, as tends to happen in life, we encountered some issues which prevented this excursion from going ahead as planned. Remember when Frey's bike was leaking from the engine block back in June? Well, it started leaking from somewhere else, seemingly from the other side of the block. On top of that, my bike developed a problem that we thought solved from last year, where the engine would eventually cut out if left idling prior to dumping a load of fuel out of the overflow pipe. An ongoing problem that I've been solving by regularly replacing this little external fuel filter, but this seems to have stopped working altogether. And because that's not quite enough obstacles to overcome, on top of that our cat is currently on medication that she needs to take 4 times per day, meaning that she can't be left by herself. So, determined to not completely fail this self-imposed challenge so late in the game, we once again loaded up the camper van for the weekend and headed out. This did present its own challenges, however, such as the car park for the Dartmouth Castle being far too small for a long wheelbase Renault Master, so we instead set our sights on the Little Dartmouth car park at the opposite end of the coastal footpath that includes the castle and our viewpoint. And we'd also have to pay an extra £5 to use the campsite. We set off from Leicester towards the M5, which we noted as being one of the most boring motorways that either of us have experienced in this country. Other than the bits either side of Bristol, with the RAC tower, the huge overpasses over the docks and the 2-layered bit just after Gordano services, it's a very featureless expanse of tarmac. Now I know motorways aren't exactly hubs of entertainment, but the M5 seems particularly monotonous, and it's not helped by all of its services either being tiny and worn out husks or overly pretentious rip-off centres. After a fairly tedious drive, we left at Buckfastleigh and followed the River Dart through Totnes. After Totnes, the roads got a little bit tighter and a bit twistier, making us miss the bikes just that little bit more. This feeling grew even more after we skirted around Dartmouth itself, as the roads quickly became single tracks with blind corners and hills. After some sharp intakes of breath, we eventually found the car park, which is operated by National Trust, so non-members have to pay £3, which you can only do by using a specific app, which takes about 10 minutes to download and sign up to, and is obviously much more convenient for everybody than just a cash ticket machine. One advantage of having the van is that we didn't have to do this walk in motorcycle gear, so we could be dressed semi-appropriately for dry and fairly warm weather. According to the sign, the castle was 1.5 miles away from us, but there's also the coastal route which is a mile longer than that. We decided we'd take the quicker route to the castle and follow the coast back. All along the non-coastal route, we were wondering where that other path would be, as the land seems to drop off pretty quickly, making for some beautiful views out to sea, but seemingly not leaving much land left to walk along. Before long, we started the steep descent down to the castle itself, where we considered getting ourselves a cheeky cream tea for two until we saw that they wanted a tenner for it. We spotted the motorcycle bay, which would have saved us such a long walk, and then headed back up the hill a bit to try and find our spot. After a couple of false starts, we decided to try the view from a house up at the start of the coastal path route, and after getting there we were 99.9% certain that this is the spot. The tide was a little bit further out for us, and judging from how visible the rocks are in the calendar picture, it may have been taken closer to winter where there would have been much less greenery. But judging by the buoy and the buildings, we think we got it pretty much spot on. The hike back on the coastal path along narrow and steep footpaths made for a challenging journey. Well, challenging for a couple of out-of-shape people who've just slept in a van anyway. Luckily, being on the coast means that you have a constant supply of breeze to cool you down and majestic views to keep you motivated. After a couple of hours, we found ourselves back at the car park where we could get ready to hit the road again. At this point we were glad that we didn't have the bikes, because as tiring as that walk was, we were glad that we did it, but we certainly would not have attempted it if we both had to ride for another 3 or 4 hours before finishing the day. That said, we did still miss the bikes because the narrow roads our intended route called for would not at all be enjoyable in this heavy, loud diesel box that struggles with hills. So we instead followed the same route back to the M5, off onto the A30 and over to Dorset. To be fair, there were stretches of the A35 that took us through East Devon area of natural beauty and Dorset itself, and these would have been excellent to take the bikes on, especially with the ideal weather we were driving through. Alas, it was not to be for us, but maybe another time we can give it a go on 2 wheels. We pulled into Wooders campsite 3 months after our previous visit, and we were pretty shocked to see that the thick woodland that was once surrounding the site had now been completely removed. We aren't sure whether this site is owned by the same people or if it's someone else, but considering how many people across the country were recently reeling, apparently, from the loss of a single sycamore tree up in Northumberland, the fact that an entire wood's worth of trees had been ripped out seemed pretty horrible. I can't imagine it's owned by the same farm, as they advertise woodland walks on their website, and they were so scenic that on our last visit we had deliberately pointed our tent at them so we could see them first thing in the morning. It soon got dark, so we settled in for the night, ready for an early start the next day for our next hike. As the morning brings in a new month, which also brings in another photo to take. Flowers Barrow is a viewpoint on the coastal path within the Lulworth firing range, an area used by the Ministry of Defence for live fire tests. This means you have to check the website to make sure that the area is open to the public, otherwise you might be dodging artillery shells or something. I had initially picked out this spot here, listed on Google Maps as Dorset Marathon Start. This is about a 30-minute walk from the Flowers Barrow viewpoint and is mostly flat, making for an ideal walk for 2 people in motorcycle gear. Being without this gear though opened us up to different options, and I had learned about the village of Tyneham at the bottom of the hill. This village was evacuated in 1943 as the Ministry of Defence wanted to use the area for training exercises to prepare for the D-Day landings, and the remnants of the buildings are still standing. There's a car park here with a suggested donation charge of £4 per vehicle, and it sits at around the halfway point of a walk that includes Flowers Barrow and the nearby beach. Without the worry of motorcycle gear, we settled on that destination and hit the road, only to stop as we left the A351 due to a warning sign of a 6'6" width limit ahead. After double checking the sign, we realised that this was likely for a road off this one, so we cautiously continued on our way, mentally preparing to have to turn around our huge metal bathtub should the need arise. Luckily this didn't happen, though the roads were narrow enough that we were both watching every corner to spot oncoming traffic, meaning we didn't get to pay much attention to the views on either side of us. We soon found the junction that led to the Tyneham car park, and after starting the sharp descent, spotted a sign warning of a 2-metre width limit. Knowing that our van is 2.6 metres wide, Frey heroically and cautiously reversed our struggling van back up the hill and into the road, and we continued on to our original destination of the Dorset Marathon Start car park, which, to be fair, offers fantastic views from its hilltop location. Despite being partially inside a cloud, we could still see far out across Dorset in every direction, taking in the views of Lulworth Castle far below us. The footpath to the viewpoint was well signposted and allowed us to get a good view of the car park we had originally intended on using, and we were slightly annoyed to see that more than a couple of vans and motorhomes were parked up there. Turns out that we could have fit down the road, despite the signs warning otherwise, and by being good boys and girls and following the rules, we had gone through some needless worry about parking and reversing into roads. Anyway, we carried on and we were soon at our destination for the photo. It took a little bit of lining up, and I may have allegedly had to jump a barbed wire fence to get a better angle, but other than the much more grey aesthetic than the calendar, I think we lined it up pretty well. Our attention then turns to the rest of our walk, which Google Maps had suggested was, quote, mostly level. And from a two-dimensional top-down perspective, this is fairly accurate, as most of the walk is between the beach and Tyneham, which is pretty flat. However, the descent from here to the beach must have been close to about 75 degrees, making for a cautious and slow clamber down the slope, some of us more graceful than others. I didn't film him, but we were put to shame by a bloke going up the hill carrying his younger daughter, taking the hard mode approach. We caught our breath for a bit on the beach before heading back inland to Tyneham to have a quick look around. The site itself is free to visit, and every building has information boards inside explaining what they were and who lived there. They even recreated the interior of the schoolhouse. We then set off up another hill towards the van, which was a much more gradual slope compared to the one we had just slid down, but it's still fairly steep and long enough to lose a few stones through sweat alone. We eventually made it back and felt a little bit proud of ourselves for doing so, leaving us with time for a bit of lunch before setting off back home. While we ate, the clouds descended further and suddenly those picturesque views had disappeared, making us grateful that we arrived when we did, otherwise we would have missed our chance to get our photo completely. We set off into the fog and back down the hills, joining the A31 heading towards the M27 and M3 to take us up and around Oxford to the M40 and on towards home. There is nothing exciting to write home about with this route, even with the stretch through New Forest being very uneventful. Despite several hours of tedium, we survived it and made it all the way home, having now completed 10 of our 12 trips for the year. This one took a bit of detective work, which will be a continuing theme as we look towards November's destination. The photo for the next month is this, with the caption simply reading, "Narrow boats, Kennet and Avon Canal." The Kennet and Avon Canal is 87 miles long and links London with the Bristol Channel, and this photo could have been taken anywhere. Personally, I also think it's the most boring picture in the whole calendar, and it's certainly going to be the most challenging spot to find. If you want to see how we get on with that, please do subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified of when that video goes live. And we'll see you next month.